Thanks for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather on the 10th day of December 2021. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Let's see, up first, take a look at some snowfall totals across the southeast coast. Yakutat, anywhere from 8 to 10 inches falling, and Mud Bay had about the same, around 9 inches, and Haynes Border Customs about 8 inches, and then it kind of drops off from there, and snowfall levels are right at or just above sea level, so anything around sea level is kind of wet and slushy, or some areas didn't see much at all. Juneau 1 to 2 inches of kind of wet slop there, and Hoonah about an inch of very slushy snow, for example. Pelican about 3.3 inches. So kind of varied in the elevation, and it's some good snow, but you get down towards sea level and its water content greatly increases. And from there, we'll see pretty good winds head out to the west there. Nikolsky, peak wind gusts 77 miles per hour. That occurred about 7 a.m., I believe, this morning. Kodiak Island there, southwest part of Kodiak Island. Akiak had 61 mile an hour peak wind gusts. Sitkinak about the same or a little bit less. And Cold Bay, 55 miles an hour. And then up to the north, Tin City seeing good northerly winds at about 53 miles an hour. And then along the southwest coast, Cape Newenham, one of the normally windier areas, had 50 to 55 mile an hour wind gusts. And that's going to continue. In fact, the area of strong winds there is going to shift eastward slowly and bear down on northeast Bristol Bay and southern Cook Inlet into Shelikof Strait and Kodiak Island here later tonight and tomorrow. In fact, storm force winds of 55 miles an hour or higher forecast in the orange shaded area, while the red shaded area there, looking at hurricane force winds, wind speeds at 75 miles an hour or higher there, and you can see all along Shelikof Strait, actually from about Kamishak Bay, Augustine Island there, right on down southwest of not quite to Sand Point, maybe to Chignik there, but you can see the storm force winds extend into Kachemak Bay and across southern Kenai Peninsula there. Otherwise, and also with the temperatures dropping into the single numbers, going to be looking at heavy freezing spray in the marine areas there with those strong winds. And moving on to the hazardous weather graphic, there's a wind chill advisory out for the northwest coast, Noatak Valley, Kotzebue, and into the Seward Peninsula there. That's out through, let's see, tonight through Sunday. Actually going on now, will continue through Sunday for wind chill temperatures 45 to 50 degrees below zero. And then in the central interior, Fairbanks, Tanana Valley there, that's a snow advisory, or actually a winter weather advisory, but for snow. And let's see, that's out until noon Saturday. And those areas could pick up another 2 to 5 inches of snow by midday tomorrow, and then it should taper off. And also for Yakutat, winter weather advisory for snow or snow advisory out until midnight tonight for anywhere from 4 to 6 inches of snow that probably will fall there. And moving on to the taking another look there, that's it for the advisories, and no warnings out except for the marine warnings. Satellite imagery showing a pretty good low pressure area slowly moving eastward there in the Gulf of Alaska. Pretty deep, and the tight gradient, higher pressure building in over the western Bering Sea, west central areas there, and that pulling cold air southeastward again across central eastern Bering Sea due to those high winds being pulled southward on those strong northwest winds there. And snow showers pretty numerous, you can see to start there right over the Fox Islands, cold core of shower activity dropping off to the southeast, so improving a little bit this afternoon as far as the precipitation rates go. But that followed by cold air and temperatures down to freezing or below into the 20s for the Alaska Peninsula, again back up toward the Pribilofs. and a band of showers, heavier convection moving onshore to the north coast of the Panhandle. And you're going to get several more surges of that as that low center tracks to the east slowly. You can see the open cell Q there south of Kodiak Island, indicating pretty convective air mass there. And that's going to be moving east-northeastward and pushing in probably to the southern Panhandle over the next 24 hours. Otherwise, areas of cloud, some light snow across south central Alaska today, anywhere from not much at all, trace amounts to maybe an inch or so. And then a little bit more than that falling up in the Tanana Valley, kind of continuous light snow going on up across much of the eastern interior right up to the eastern Arctic coast. And again, you can see the cirrus there with the next system that's trying to push into the western Aleutians, just the cirrus cloud shield showing up now. But that'll gradually, probably by Sunday, that'll push some gale force winds into the western Aleutians. But before that happens, we're going to have that low in the Gulf down to 964 millibars, and then the high out there to the west and also over the Russian Far East, tightening up the gradient. The ridge is going to be shifting eastward a little bit faster than the low center is going to be pulling eastward. So that's going to put a squeeze on the atmosphere and tighten the gradient up. And blowing snow, strong winds will be developing and moving eastward into Bristol Bay, especially Shelikof Strait, western Alaska Range. Look for strong winds to develop through the passes and down into Kodiak Island, as well as Copper River Basin. And for the forecast for tonight, you can see very tight gradient now along and just east of the Alaska Range into Cook Inlet and across Kodiak Island. So back up into the 50 to 70 mile an hour wind gust range there for Kodiak Island, with those storm and hurricane force wind warnings out for those areas. Also look for strong winds southern Cook Inlet, and winds on the slowly increasing the Copper River Basin out of the north and eventually along the North Gulf Coast as well. But that'll be late tonight. Areas of snow end over Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, and continue for the Copper River Basin, eastern North Gulf Coast, with the snow advisory out till midnight for Yakutat, with areas of snow all the way up to the Arctic coast and North Slope, but pretty light up in that area. No significant accumulations expected. Look for snow showers, areas of light snow to continue for the Panhandle. Again, with any elevation at all, snow could be a mix down to the south there, a net out toward Cloaca and Sitka. Otherwise, the Aleutians, kind of a break there. Diminishing winds for the Fox Islands coming down. Same thing for the Pribilofs, but snow showers continuing, but starting to taper off. Just flurries for St. Lawrence Island. Winds not much of a factor there. And moving on to Saturday, you can see the warm front finally pushing up and tightening the gradient in advance of the front there for the western Aleutians, pushing some rain and snow in the afternoon, increasing the winds as far east as Amchitka Island. But Adak and Atka under the ridge looking pretty good wind-wise, maybe even some clearing, and possibly a dry day for Saturday. Fox Islands, less snow showers, a lot less wind, and Pribilof's winds almost becoming light with that gradient. Same thing for St. Lawrence Island, but just a north breeze there with maybe some flurries. And breezy with snow on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, and maybe dry actually on the south side there, but very tight gradient across south central Alaska from the Alaska Range eastward there to about Prince William Sound. And blowing snow, strong wind gusts, again 70 plus miles per hour, Kodiak Island, Shelikof Strait up in Kamishak Bay, and big increase in the winds, Copper River Basin, all of south central Alaska there, especially in channeled areas, Copper River Delta, and areas of light snow continue, central eastern interior to the central and eastern Arctic coast. Low pressure now off the central coast of the Panhandle, spinning surges of moisture inland in the form of rain or snow, depending on elevation, latitude, and time of day. Moving on to the outlook for Sunday, you can see the front pushes into the Bering Sea there with gale force, probably storm force winds back over the northwest Bering Sea. And the winds and precipitation start to increase even for the Fox Islands. That'll be late. Same thing for the Pribilofs. High pressure, clear, cold, light wind conditions for the western interior, and a lot less wind for the Alaska Peninsula. Wind starting to come down a little for Kodiak Island. We can still see a lot of lines there across southern Alaska. And on these charts where the lines are closest together, that's where the winds blow the strongest, and that's quite a gradient yet. So very strong channeled winds, Copper River Delta, Prince William Sound looking still strong wind gusts, as well as Copper River Basin. Another front brings more moisture into the southern southeast coast with increasing winds, Lynn Canal Glacier Bay out of the north. Lows tonight in the 20s, lower 30s for the Panhandle, and above zero East and south of the Alaska Range, below zero to the west into Bristol Bay, lower 20s Kodiak Island. Highs tomorrow, single numbers Copper River Basin, below zero west of the Alaska Range, teens to the east, 20s along the North Gulf Coast, mid-20s to lower 30s for the Panhandle. Followed by lows, big drop there. McGrath, Nikolai, 30, 35 below. Bristol Bay, 15 to 20 below, and 5 below to 10 above. South Central Alaska, lower teens, Northern Panhandle, to mid to upper 20s to the south. Highs on Sunday, well below zero west of the Alaska Range, just low, or 0 to 5 for South Central Alaska, maybe 9 for Homer, 18 Kodiak for your high, upper teens or mid-teens for the Northern Panhandle, lower 30s to the south. And below zero, north of the Alaska Range, all the way to the Arctic coast for your lows. Highs, not much warmer, maybe a shade above zero for Fairbanks. And lows following morning, a little colder, down into the 15 to 30 below range.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Line weather graphic, marginal VFR, central eastern Arctic coast, central eastern North Slope, and the Brooks Range there. And most of the eastern interior across the Yukon River, right on down to the Alaska Range, south and east of the Alaska Range VFR, right into the North Gulf Coast, Kenai Peninsula, until you get to about Seldovia or so. Areas of IFR for Kodiak Island, areas of IFR southeast part of the southeast coast, and the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, a little bit of IFR there from, I'll say, Pilot Point down to east of Nelson Lagoon. And marginal VFR for the Pribilof, some IFR St. Lawrence Island, and the southwest Bering Sea with the incoming system. We'll see out there that that IFR increases and spreads eastward to about Amchitka Island. And marginal VFR for the remainder of the Bering Sea, Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, still some IFR there in Bristol Bay and on the Bering Sea side of the peninsula, as well as around Gamble, maybe Savunga. Marginal VFR, Brooks Range on out to the Arctic coast, along the mid and upper Yukon River, down to the across the Tanana Valley, some upper Tanana Valley, some IFR there, Northway Tok, maybe Nabesna, up to Eagle, but Eielson, North Fairbanks, those areas, Nenana, all marginal. Some IFR along the western slopes of the Alaska Range. Areas of IFR Kodiak Island again, as well as the Panhandle. And for the day on, or the morning on Sunday, got VFR, western part of the state, until you get down to the southwest mountains. And south and east of the Alaska Range, VFR, north of the mountains there across the eastern interior. Marginal VFR areas of, all the way to the eastern Arctic coast. And the Panhandle, marginal VFR with some IFR down over the toward the border. Kodiak Island, no change, areas of IFR at best. And the area from Atka westward in the southwest Bering Sea, IFR. Otherwise, mostly marginal for the remainder of the Bering Sea up to about Nunivak Island. And Alaska Peninsula, marginal for the St. Lawrence Island area. Moving on, Sunday afternoon, some IFR shows up western St. Lawrence Island. Big area IFR now out over the Aleutians and most of the Bering Sea just west of the Pribilofs. And marginal VFR Alaska Peninsula. Good VFR southwest coast, northeast Bristol Bay, marginal for Kodiak Island. VFR North Gulf Coast, improvement there over the Panhandle. And let's see, marginal VFR along the Alaska Range, upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country north of Eagle there. Looks like marginal VFR up to the Porcupine River, as well as the North Slope, eastern Arctic coast, much of the Brooks Range. Passes Anatuvik, look for marginal VFR at times tomorrow, occasionally marginal for Adigan as well. Lake Clark and Merrill, pretty good. VFR flying both passes, either approach. Rainy, marginal VFR, especially on the west side to start, and then becoming VFR throughout the day. Windy, marginal VFR, VFR out the south entrance. And same pattern there, marginal VFR on the north side, VFR through the pass and out to the south. Mentasta, IFR, northern entrance, otherwise marginal. Tanita, starting out a little marginal, becoming VFR throughout the day, definitely by the afternoon. Portage, VFR. And Chilkoot and White, looks like it'll hold IFR through the entire day Saturday. Freezing levels at the surface. They're near Nikolsky and then north of the remainder of the Aleutian chain, but south of everywhere else. And 2,000 feet, not quite making it to Chimiana-2. Icing, areas of mixed icing here for the eastern North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle. And area, kind of an elevated threat there for the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutians to the Pribilofs. Nothing too significant though, but just a risk of. Otherwise icing free over the interior. Jet stream, northwest jet, pretty strong, coming over the top of that high south of the Aleutians, up to 165 knots across the Fox Islands. Cold upper trough over the central eastern interior, and the Panhandle pushes a main jet well to the south. And for the 9,000 foot wind flow, 65 knots, Alaska Peninsula, 80 knots there across Unalaska Island, 40 knots through the Bering Strait to St. Lawrence Island, southwest 35 into the Panhandle. 3,000 feet, 60 knot northwest winds across the Aleutian Range, and looks like Kamishak Gap and Shelikof Strait, 45 knots out of the north for the Seward Peninsula, and then big increase in the wind starting to push in toward the western Aleutian, 65 to 70 knots there. Turbulence, look for a moderate chop on the increase there, Shimiat, Tudam, Chitka. Otherwise, possible severe turbulence there, Kamishak Gap and the Aleutian Range on the lee side there. Otherwise, a lot of moderate chop over southern Alaska and Kodiak.
So my heart is definitely racing. I don't know about anyone else's. This is the stuff nerds dream of.
10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6,
That's gonna
5,
happen.
4, 3, 2.
That countdown you just heard? We'll get back to that in a minute. Last episode, we saw the epic launch of ICESat-2, NASA's newest state-of-the-art ice-observing satellite. But now that that's in orbit, the pressure to deliver results is on.
Between launch and, the first ground returns, took 17, 18 days or something like this. It's a time when you're quite nervous.
9 years ago, Dr. Torsten Marcus took over as the lead project scientist for ICESat-2 during a time when the mission needed a champion.
You start fighting for a mission over, for 9 years now.
So when ICESat-2 was turned on for the first time 18 days after it was launched, only then would the science team know if the whole thing had worked. And it did.
First of all, it's kind of emotional, right? Being here, ICESat-2 was developing for 9-10 years. Project scientist. You live the mission, right?
If it sounds like there's a lot of noise in the background, that's because Torsten is being interviewed from a plane 1,500 feet in the air. IceBridge was tasked with the job of bridging the data between the end of ICESat's mission and the beginning of ICESat-2, about a 9-year difference.
The goal is that it would run until ICESat-2 launched and then would have overlap with ICESat-2 as well, so we can get a really long, well-calibrated time series from IceBridge.
As the deputy project scientist for Operation IceBridge, Brick works closely with Torsten to make sure the two missions are syncing up.
The timing was everything during that mission, which was a real challenge because not only do we need to...
Basically what you need to take away is getting an airplane and a satellite in space to fly over the same flight path at the same time and collect matching data is really, really hard. IceBridge was tasked with two objectives: check the accuracy of ICESat-2's data over land ice and over sea ice. They were able to lock in the land ice data fairly quickly in the mission, but the sea ice data...
It was really tricky. We waited day after day. Do we fly the sea ice? It's still on our list.
7, 6,
That's gonna
5,
happen.
4, 3, 2, 1. Mark on the overpass, 0435, 35 Zulu.
Here's what just happened. A plane 1,500 feet up and a satellite 308 miles up measured the same sea ice at the same time. This moment finally linked veteran mission Operation IceBridge's data to that of its new sister mission, ICESat-2. Two projects that, until now, were separate for nearly 10 years.
It's a very satisfying feeling because you do something that is meaningful and in the bigger picture. And yeah, it's very satisfying.
Our search for knowledge doesn't end here. Grace Follow-On and ICESat-2, the two satellite missions that launched this year, will continue to bring in incredible data for the foreseeable future. The steady drumbeat of campaigns in the field goes on, but most of all, the people who look for answers will never stop searching. And from our perspective, it's pretty clear why.
My favorite planet is the planet Earth.
What? Earth? Really?
The Earth, obviously.
Favorite planet in the solar system? Earth, right? We live on it. It's a really important one.
Favorite planet is Earth.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Why?
when you look out at the other planets, they're absolutely fascinating. They've got all sorts of interesting systems going on. They've got dust storms. But then when you're on another planet, looking back at Earth, I mean, it's just incredible.
Whenever you go in different places, it looks so different, so amazing. It's just, I love the planet Earth. It's just a very special planet. This is our home.
We've seen things far beyond the solar system. But even with all that, even the amazing things we've seen, one of the most amazing is the Earth itself.
It's got to be Earth. It's got to be Earth.
It's got to be here. I like the polar regions up here, of Earth. Yeah, sorry. It's very boring.
Earth is good.
Earth is good.
We live here, it sustains our life.
I'm not going to turn my back on it.
It's got water, it's got ice, it's got vegetation. I mean, it's rich with life. And so studying Earth is a very, very rewarding career. And I think if we were on any other planet, we would be trying to get to Earth as quickly as we could.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Sea ice analysis done for today, Friday, 10th of November. Still advancing to the south and southwest. A fairly good clip there, the outer ice edge. And now probably continue to do so through the weekend. And sometime first of next week, it'll begin to slow its advance as winds become more westerly and possibly even southwesterly come the middle or possibly by the middle of next week, and that would probably halt its advance for at least a short time. Anyway, going on to the coastal water forecasts. Southeast coast, south coast of the Panhandle there, south winds 20 knots, and small craft advisories on the north coast for 25 knot winds from the east-southeast. And Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, gale force northerly gusts of 40 knots. Stevens Passage, easterly gale force gust of 40 knots. And Clarence Strait, south winds 15 knots with 8-foot seas. And for Sunday, Clarence Strait, north winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet, and northerlies 30 knots for Stevens Passage, and Arctic air blowing into the Lynn Canal Glacier Bay area with gale force winds of 35 knots. South coast, light winds out of the east at 15. Small craft advisories for the central coast, east winds 25 to 30 knots Sunday, and northeast 25 knots for the north coast. Prince William Sound, small craft advisories, north winds 30 knots with 6-foot seas, and east 30 with gust 45 for the eastern North Gulf Coast. North winds 40 knots with gust of 50 knots there for the western North Gulf Coast. And hurricane force wind warnings out for Kamishak Bay. Sustained west 65 knots with higher gusts, and the Barren Islands northwest storm warnings there for northwest winds 55 knots with gusts of 65 knots. Cook Inlet, Southern Cook Inlet, small craft advisories. Let me back that up. Small craft advisories northwest 25 knots, even lighter winds north of the Forelands. Then for Sunday, winds come down just about all areas. Still have gales, Kamishak Bay, but down considerably from tomorrow. Northwest 45 knots, storm warnings for the Barren Islands northwest 50 knots. Cook Inlet north to northeast 15 to 20 knots. Prince William Sound, winds north at 20, and small craft advisories for the North Gulf Coast for north winds at 25 knots and 8-foot seas. Kodiak Island, storm warnings northwest 50 to 55 knots, sustained with higher gusts 65 knots. Storm warnings from Sitkinak to Cape Sarachev, and that's for northwest winds 50 to 55 knots, gusts 65 to 70 knots, seas 16 to 22 feet. Gale warnings Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, sustained northwest 40 and Bristol Bay northwest 45 knots. Sunday, gale warnings Alaska Peninsula, north winds 35 to 45 knots. Storm warnings continue there from Sitkinak to Castle Cape, northwest 50 knots, and 35 to 45 knot gales for Kodiak Island from the northwest. Bristol Bay, gale warnings north 35 knots. On Alaska Island, northwest 30 to 35 knots. Unmak Island, west 30 knots. West-southwest 20 to 30 knots for Atakatka, swinging around to the southeast at 30 for Amchitka Island, and good gales east 45 knots from Kiska to Shemya. For Sunday, south winds 45 knots from Shemya to Amchitka Island, southeast 45 knots, Atakatka, Unmak Island, and on Alaska Island, east-southeast 35 to 40 knots. For the southwest coast, gale warning south of Nunivak Island, northwest winds 40 knots. Everywhere else has a northwest wind at 30 knots with seas running 7 to 10 feet in the ice-free areas. And for Sunday, gale warnings continue south of Nunivak Island, north 35 knots, east 45 knots for the Pribilofs, and storm warnings for the northern Bering Sea, St. Matthew Island, east at 55 knots, but only 20 knots from the north for St. Lawrence Island. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, brisk wind advisories there on the far east end of the coast there, otherwise northwest 15 to 20 knots. And from Cape Beaufort to Wales, brisk wind advisories northwest 25 to 30 knots. And for Sunday, west-northwest 20 knots from Wales to Cape Beaufort, west 20 knots, western Arctic coast, and brisk wind advisories for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast for west winds at 30 knots, otherwise 15 knots on the central coast. For tonight, strong winds develop Kodiak Island, the western Alaska Range, southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, and those areas, and light snow over the eastern interior for tomorrow. Strong winds, again, Kodiak Island area, Barren Islands, North Gulf Coast, all of south central Alaska, and a big storm pushes into the western Bering on Sunday. Otherwise, conditions start to improve. Still pretty windy southern Alaska there, but winds on the coming down with some rain and snow southern panhandle.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.